Hello! Welcome, new FileMaker learner. My name is Matt Petrowski, and in this video, we're going to be taking a look at learning FileMaker functions. So hang around and we'll be on my desktop in no time. All right, so what are we learning today in our video about FileMaker? Well, in this segment or this section of the videos, we've been learning about FileMaker's fields and calculations, and that was after I covered FileMaker's environment. If you'd like to go back and look at some of those other videos, definitely just click on the channel icon for ISO FileMaker magazine. That'll take you to the channel, and you should be able to see the playlists if you want to find those, if you found this video out of order based on a search that you did. The playlists are there on the YouTube channel. So what we're going to do today, and I always like to jump right in, is we're going to be creating a new file. Now I suggest that you choose this option. I'm using FileMaker 16 for these videos, and most of the time when I'm covering stuff in FileMaker, you're going to be able to use pretty much any version of FileMaker. The core doesn't change too much. And it doesn't matter whether you have 13, 14, 15, 16, it's just a few features that you might be missing. Now, I happen to already have a copy of a new database that I've created. I just named mine functions. That's all that I named it. And basically what we're going to be doing is going through, I can't say this is the best way to learn functions, but it's going to be my suggestion. When I first got started with FileMaker, I had the FileMaker manual. They had a printed book, and it was thick, not super thick, but thick enough that I had sticky notes and dog-eared all the different pages of all the different things that I wanted to learn, and that was the functions. So my first suggestion is when you're learning FileMaker, if you're unfamiliar with the functions, dedicate and set aside some time to just learn the functions and just go through them. Now, we're only going to be able to go through a few here in this short video. We're only learning FileMaker for 30 minutes at a time when I do these videos, and I save some time for questions and answers for those who are live. But here we go. So the first thing is, if you don't have FileMaker's documentation, go get it. You can get it on FileMaker's website. I'll bring up a web browser right here. And what I have done is I've already loaded FileMaker's documentation. Now, as I scroll up here, we'll go to the home of the documentation. You can find this online. Now, we can see quite clearly here that this is on my local hard drive. I have that's not HTTP, that's file, and I have a volume or a hard drive called Blue Orb for some reason. But if you go to the documentation online with FileMaker, you're looking for this right here. You can search for it. Let me show you how to do that. I'll create a new browser window, and any type of search will actually work. You can search for anything, usually using something that's specific to FileMaker. It's easier for Google to pull that up, but of course we're going to limit our search to FileMaker's website only. So let's say, for example, we know about the substitute function, which I'm going to have to spell that correctly. Substitute, we're going to limit this search to a given site, and that site is going to be FileMaker.com. When we hit return and Google goes out and it looks for that, it's going to find all of FileMaker's substitute functions in even previous versions. So we can see right here that this is finding FileMaker 12 help documentation. Now, depending on what version of FileMaker you have, if I zoom out here and scroll, those are the first things that FileMaker finds. We're going to modify that search just a little bit. We're going to actually put in URL. This is another Google qualifier. And I'm basically saying, well, FileMaker or Google, I want you to find the documentation within just a specific version. In this case, FileMaker 16. And so there we go. We come up with FileMaker 16. We can see that 16 is in the URL. That's how FileMaker organizes their documentation. That's what we're going to do. With this link right here, finding it live, we can see quite clearly that I'm on the actual web page. It's best if you download this to your hard drive. I'll scroll up really quickly up to the top. I'll click on this home button, and then that's where we're going to access that feature that I showed you right here. Now, downloading the help, FileMaker's help, to your hard drive makes it much easier because if you don't have a Wi-Fi connection or if you just want things to go faster, you're really not dependent on your internet connection anymore. So, long story short there, that's what we want to do. Get the documentation onto our hard drive. Now that we have it on our hard drive, what we're going to do is we are going to simply just go through all of the functions. So the first key thing to take away here is you can go to any one of these areas. So we're going to go, FileMaker lists all of its different functions, and it's a main topic right here of function reference. We can do a category list, which that's how we're going to see it within FileMaker, or we can do an alphabetical list. Now, I don't suggest alphabetical list because that's sort of daunting. We select on that and you just have this massive list of all of these functions, and you start getting a little bit discouraged and saying, oh my gosh, how is there any way that I'm actually going to learn all of these? Well, if you've watched one of my previous videos, all of these get functions, you really don't even need to learn them. There's a previous video that I did about in FileMaker's environment about the get functions, and I show a really nice trick on how you can get all of these onto the layout, see what they return, and that's the best way to learn what all of those provide you. So right off the bat, we can take the get functions out of the equation. I prefer to do this, to actually select on the main item. In this case, I'm going to go to not necessarily the aggregate, but for today's video, I'm going to go to the text functions. Now, why would we want to start with the text functions? Well, the text functions are probably where you're going to be spending most of your time, and that's because text is dealing with pretty much all kinds of data. You are going to be pulling things out, changing text, modifying things. In order to make the logic of your solution work, modifying text is predominantly what you're going to be doing, even if part of your solution deals with numbers and aggregate functions. When I say aggregate, I'm referring to summary functions. So we're going to start with the text functions. When we select on the main header here in the documentation, FileMaker is going to give us, as I zoom this off a little bit, it's going to give us some information very briefly about these. And I suggest that you skim them and say, okay, char returns the characters for Unicode, code points, and number. Unicode. I've heard Unicode, but I don't necessarily know what it was. Okay. Don't, at this point, when you're learning FileMaker's functions, don't tell yourself, I have to know exactly what it does. What you need to do is you need to skim, read these items, and then when you get to the point where maybe you're trying to figure something out, you'll go out, you'll look for help, and then you'll see a FileMaker formula or a calculation, and you'll see that it uses the code function. And you'll say, okay, I read about the code function. It said something about Unicode, but I don't know what that is exactly. Let's break down this calculation and see exactly what it does. That's the first part of the equation when you're learning the functions. It's just being familiar of what exists, even if you don't understand it. Then we'll put it into practice, is step 2. So we've got exact, filter, just read these for yourself. Obviously, if I sat here and did this for you, we'd be here and I'd be eating up all of your time when you can obviously do this on your own. So the next step in learning the functions after you've gone through and skimmed through a lot of these is basically just play with them, put them into practice. So that's what we're going to learn in the rest of this video. So how are we going to do that? Well, there's one function in particular that we are going to look at today, which is going to help us play with FileMaker's functions and learn how to use them. FileMaker, when we look at the logic functions, let's go to the logical functions right here, and we expand this. We have all kinds of things, and logic, if you want to think about the whole logical functions section, I think of it like a train track. You've got trains and data's going all kinds of different ways, and you need to switch it sometimes to go somewhere else, and that's all that it is. All the logic is just a massive train track of where do you want to switch and make things happen. Case is like a switch. Choose is like a switch. If function is definitely like a switch. But the one that we are most interested in today is evaluate. Now, we've been learning about FileMaker's calculation engine. And FileMaker's calculation engine shows up everywhere in all of FileMaker. Anywhere where you see the little pencil icon with a square, or you see the specify button, you know you're going to be able to use FileMaker's calculation engine. Now, the whole of FileMaker's calculation engine is designed to evaluate, we're right here on the evaluate function, it's designed to evaluate all of the rest of FileMaker's calculation functions and anything else that you have going on in your database. Math, numbers, you get it. So let's set up a database that allows us to play with FileMaker's functions. Now, first off, I'm going to suggest if you are working with FileMaker Pro and you're not using FileMaker Pro Advanced, where we've got some developer tools, then I highly suggest that you beg, borrow, or steal whoever you can while you're working with FileMaker to get a copy of FileMaker Advanced, primarily because it gives us access to this item right here, Data Viewer, and Script Debugger. So if you have a regular copy of FileMaker Pro, you won't have these super valuable tools. The Data Viewer itself is going to be almost exactly the same as what we're going to do in the rest of this video. So here, the Data Viewer gives us access to this second tab called Watch, where we're able to click this little plus icon down at the bottom. And when we click that, FileMaker brings up, at least here in FileMaker 16, with previous versions of FileMaker, let's say 14, 15, if you have even 12 or 13, you don't get the immediate effect of being able to see the results of a calculation. So for example, if I put in a left function and I say left of hello, well, let's do it a real easy one. We're going to do left words, and I'll put hello in here. So if I have just a super simple function of hello world, and let me get rid of the rest of this. There we go. And the function's so straightforward. It's telling me, that's what FileMaker's calculation engine does when you put in things. The parameters themselves, and if you don't know, this is the function name. The whole thing is called a prototype in computer language speak, and then each one of these is an expected parameter. So with the expected parameter, it's pretty easy to read. So I really don't have to say too much about left or left words. It says, give me some text and how many characters starting at the left of that text do you want? So you really don't have to worry about those super easy functions. What you have to worry about are the functions that you don't know what they do or how they can help you. So here it's pretty easy. We put in, we want one word, and it gives us exactly what we want. And we get to see it down here at the bottom, hello. And that's all because of this little checkbox. And again, this is only in FileMaker 16 that we have the ability to automatically evaluate. And it's really only in this part of FileMaker, this Data Viewer Watch area. So again, highly suggest that you get that. Now, for those of you who are not using FileMaker Pro Advanced, this is still valuable to those of you that have FileMaker Advanced. What we're going to do is we are going to go into our Manage Database. I did that with Command-Shift-D, and we are going to create two fields. The first one is code, or functions, if you want to call it. I just call it code because that's how I think of it. And let's see, I'll create that. And the next one, let me back this off so we can see it up there. The next one we're going to put is result. And result is going to use that function that we just looked at. So it's going to be a calculation. So choose a calculation type. And what we're going to do for the calculation, once we create this, the calculation dialog box comes up. Let's zoom out and get that on the screen. We are going to use the evaluate. So here's what's pretty cool. We are basically using FileMaker to put fields into a table so that those fields can use FileMaker's calculation engine to give us a result. This is really pretty cool. At least I think it's pretty cool. So what is it exactly that we want to evaluate? We want to evaluate code, whatever is in our other field. So by doing that, we're going to need to do one other thing. Down here at the bottom, we have to change the calculation result to text. Now, sometimes you're going to be working with numerical data, but FileMaker will still convert that numerical data. It does its best to convert things into the expected type. Otherwise, if you think that it might be coming in as text and you want it to be treated as a number or treated as a date, In a previous video in this series, I talked about FileMaker's getAs functions, which are the coercion functions. So we're going to set this to text, and then we're going to click the one other thing that we learned about again in a previous video, storage options. And the option that we're going to choose here is do not store calculation results. In other words, FileMaker, we want you to evaluate this no matter what when anything referenced in this calculation changes. What is it that changes in this calculation? Well, does the evaluate function change? No, it doesn't, but the contents of code may change. So with those few things selected and we click OK, FileMaker is going to automatically add them onto the field for us, or onto the layout for us. We zoom out. I'm going to go into layout mode with Command L. I'm going to scroll this box out and give myself a lot more to see. I know that it's the result, but I'll put the label above. I'll scroll the code out and put it right next to the result and put that right there. So again, if you're using FileMaker Pro or if you're just using FileMaker Pro Advanced, this is a great way to learn FileMaker. This dialog that comes up, save layout changes, I'm going to choose yes. Now in FileMaker, of course, you can't do anything without a record, so I'm going to create a new record, and what we now have is a FileMaker database that allows us to play with code as if we had FileMaker Advanced, but we don't. We can put anything in this. If I want to put 1 plus 1, FileMaker is going to evaluate that and give me 2. If I want to put 1 plus 4, of course, I'm going to get 5. So this is where we can play with FileMaker's functions now. And what we do is side by side with our documentation, we can go into any one of these functions and play with the exact examples that FileMaker gives us. And this is what I suggest. This is what I did when I had my book going all the way back to 1995. I took the book and then I directly copied the examples out of FileMaker's help. And I did this by typing, and that actually probably helped me out. But here you get to just copy and paste, which is absolutely wonderful. So we're going to learn about a little nuance of one particular function of the text functions. I'm going to go to the text functions and expand that out. Again, after we've skimmed through all of this, we're going to pick something that maybe we don't know about. I'm going to pick the substitute function, because substitute is so wonderful, and it has a lot more power than FileMaker lets on. It is another reason why we are going to work through FileMaker's documentation as we learn functions, because the documentation itself has hidden little tidbits that you don't see right off the bat. So right off the bat, I can see, okay, this is the substitute function, and FileMaker gives me the format of substitute, text, search string, replace string. So right here from the documentation, I can copy this and take it over to my FileMaker database. I copied that with Command C, I back off, I go over here and I paste this in. Now, FileMaker's default result when it can't evaluate something in the calculation dialog box, always and forever, is to basically give you this little question mark. This little question mark, I think about it as, hey, FileMaker, do this for me, and FileMaker comes back and says, huh? So you can actually test against that when you're writing a lot of your code. You can write something, say, for example, and this is only if you're going to use the evaluate function, if the results of my evaluate equal question mark, then something went wrong. But you're not going to be using evaluate in your normal code a whole lot. We're using evaluate here as a method to test and play with the calculation engine. So let's play with the substitute function. Let's give it some text. So I'm going to type in hello world. Let's capitalize that. And what's the next thing it wants? Well, it wants a search string. Well, what are we going to search for? Well, let's search for the word hello. I know it exists. And let's replace that with big. And let's see what we get. I think it's going to be pretty obvious. We have taken hello world and we've replaced hello with big. So we've been able to play with this right here in order to see what it does. Every time that you're learning FileMaker's calculate its functions, any of its functions, you always have to remember that anything, and I'm going to make this a little bit easier for us to see. We'll push our result over here a little bit and we'll scroll this. I like to see all code on one line so that we can see the result. The key thing is with all of FileMaker's functions is that the input can be whatever you want as long as you know where it's coming from. So the input can be from a field in the current table that your particular layout is based on. The input can come from related data that's connected to this. The input can be a global variable or a local variable. These are those temporary spaces we talked about in a previous video. So it could be from a variable. It could also be from a global variable, which is a double $sign. So what you want to do is you want to sort of start to think about functions and get a little creative in terms of, was there a time that I needed to substitute something? Was there a time where maybe a user in a name field input the prefix of Mr. and Mrs. and I didn't want that in the field, I just wanted their first name? Well, the substitute would be a good function in order to apply there. And that applies to all of the different functions. And like I said, what we're going to do is we are going to leverage the documentation. So watch what happens when I go over to the documentation here for the substitute function and I start to scroll down. This is a really simple, output that it's giving me. Okay, substitute, text, search string, replace string. But as I scroll down a little bit farther and I actually look at the description, we get something that is actually super helpful to us. And unfortunately to FileMaker, it's not part of their default listing of the substitute function. We get the fact that down at the bottom, it tells us substitute, and we see these brackets where we know in FileMaker that these represent optional things that we can do in a function. But what we're able to do is it says multiple substitutions are allowed. Oh, well, that's pretty cool. Why was that buried down in FileMaker's documentation? And what's this down here in the bottom of the examples? Substitute text A with A, B with B. Replaces every... I want to take a look at that. So I'm going to copy that and take that over to my database. Now, of course, I'm getting the question mark right now, but what is it missing? It's simply missing some text. So let's just go put some text in. A big brown dog, and let's just see what we get. A big brown... I typed in lowercase b, it's making it a bigger case b and bigger case b. What happens if I go, I think you get the idea. What I've been able to learn now is just by reading that documentation and taking a quick little trip over to the help, is I've been able to learn that FileMaker's substitute function actually allows me to do almost an unlimited number of substitutions, which is actually a very cool thing because in a lot of your data processing, you will need to substitute this, take that result, and then maybe add something to that result, and then do another substitution onto that. And that's what you're going to be doing as a FileMaker learner, is realizing that the process of breaking things down isn't necessarily always going to be done in a script where you're automating things. You can also do it within the context of a calculation. You just have to know how to write that calculation so that it does multiple things or multiple steps. So as I suggested in one of my previous videos, we learned the let function, and I'm going to do a little cheat right here and type in a little shortcut that I have, fm let, which is going to give me a little function right here. I'm going to cut that. This will look a little bit confusing, but we'll go with it for right now. So what I have is I have a let function, and I'm telling myself, okay, I created a little strip of paper is how I think of them, that's going to store something. It's going to store the results of my substitute function. My substitute function is replacing all lowercase a's with uppercase and lowercase b's. I could add c's, d's, etc., whatever I want. But now I can take this text and I can concatenate to it. That's the concatenation operator right there. A big brown dog. I know that I'm going to need a space. This is just from experience, but I'm not going to put the... put it in for right now because we will see in our result. So I can figure out what's actually going wrong with this. And I know right off the bat from experience why I'm getting this question mark. And this again is the frustrating part of FileMaker and working with it. Now here's a key takeaway from my mistake right here. of not getting the result, because I expected to get the result, a big brown dog ate all the food. Some of you, if you've been working with FileMaker for a long time, you know what the problem is, and that is one of the downsides of working here within FileMaker. In this regard, FileMaker just gives us a question mark. And again, this is also one of the reasons why FileMaker Advanced, its data viewer, is so helpful. Or taking this code into a FileMaker, an actual FileMaker calculation dialog, will help us out. So let's go do that. Let's go see what the problem is. I did a select all. I copied that. I'm going to go use my data viewer. I already have one variable created for me. I'll just get rid of whatever is there, and I'll paste that in, and we'll have FileMaker try to evaluate. Well, in this case, it won't actually. Well, let's click Monitor to get our dialog box so that it tells us. So FileMaker has an internal syntax checker when we're working with our functions. As long as we're in a FileMaker calculation dialog box, FileMaker will attempt to tell us what's wrong with our calculation. As opposed to the FileMaker field that we're typing into, where we're saying, hey, FileMaker, use your calculation engine and go evaluate this, and FileMaker just says, huh? Question mark. We get this little dialog box. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not when you're learning. But we got list usage is not allowed in this calculation. Now that's pretty nondescript. If you don't know what this actually means, list usage, and you don't know what function it applies to, especially when you're using multiple functions, you can really get lost. Well, it turns out that what we have is we have this one trailing semicolon right there. The let function in particular doesn't like that, and that really only comes from years of working with FileMaker. And you can see down there we got our result. So I'll monitor that here, and we'll go fix it in the calculation here. If I can get FileMaker to actually do its selection. Get rid of it there, and there we get our result. So with our result now, actually let's put that in the screen. We'll zoom in and back off. We can now see that we got a big brown dog ate all the food. Add our space, and maybe that's the result that we're looking for. So here is the third takeaway that I want you to walk away with. The first one was to skim and scan all of the functions. Just be familiar with what exists. The second takeaway was use the documentation intentionally and put the functions into a situation where you have to play with them and come up with mental examples that you can actually work with. If there's a field that you want to reference, change the field that you're going to reference here in the function to play with it. And the third takeaway is, oh gosh, I just lost my train of thought on the first two. The third takeaway, I'm going to have to come up with that. Dun, da, da, da. What was I thinking of, Matt? What was I thinking of? I'm going to get to it. Brain pause. All right. Well, let's just move on with these functions. I'll come up with that third one. I had such a good flow going there. But that's what happens when you're trying to recall what you covered before and what you're going to cover now. The third one is, I think it's give yourself the time in order to become familiar with that, outside of coming up with the example, with your own examples and working with FileMaker's examples. But I'm sure it'll come back to me as my brain is working on the recall. So we're at 28 minutes. That's probably what threw me off. I looked at the time. My fault. We want to basically find out, what I wanted to give you also in this video was sort of a quick rundown of what have I used most frequently as I've been a developer, where you should spend some time versus where you shouldn't. And again, this is all going to come down to your database and your system and what you are working on. If you're working on a scientific database and you're like, which functions should I start to learn? Probably you're going to be using a lot of the number functions and so forth. I, on the other hand, tend to do a lot of data manipulation, and so I tend to always start with the text function. So I wanted to do a rundown of these as part of this video just to give you a little bit of a heads up in terms of these. Maybe we can go through some others, and if you have any questions about specific functions, you're going to be able to put those in the chat. Let me take a look here off to the side. Got no questions coming in so far. Think about your questions. If you have any questions about a specific function or an issue, I'll be able to put that in the chat and spend a little bit of time there. But otherwise, let's just go through these really quickly so I can give you sort of a cursory overview to get you primed and started for going through these things. All right. So char and code, these typically deal with keyboard actions and watching for when the users press certain keys and so forth. Exact is a conversion function which is going to convert text. It partners with proper, upper, and lower. Although exact is more of a test function where you're going to test the equality of two pieces of text. Filter is going to allow you to have some input and then out of that input extract what you want. So it's like an extraction tool. Filter values is the same thing as filter, but it's actually going to work with a list of values. Where filter works with just a string, filter values is going to work with multiple return delimited items. Hiragana is specific to our Japanese version of FileMaker. Anything that is a getAs function is a coercion function. GetAs CSS, getAs date, getAs number, SVG, time, timestamp. Those are all specific on data types. We don't need to spend a whole lot of time on those. GetAs URL encoded is specific to encoding a URL into the proper format when loading it because URLs can't contain certain special characters. Spaces, commas, pluses, etc. Those all get encoded. Encoding meaning they get converted into a special format. Get value, a very good function to know because out of a list of data, it's going to allow you to grab one specific item out of that list. If you have 5 items, get value, you say get me the 4th value, you can pull it right out. Hiragana is also for our Japanese. JSON, 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 JSON. I really wouldn't worry about those if you're a new FileMaker learner. Those deal with the JSON format, which comes from the world of JavaScript, where you apply some structure to text. Let's scroll down, get some more. Kana hankaku. These again, all of the kanji, these all have to do with our foreign language versions. Left values, left words, they all start with left. They get you the left of something. Pretty straightforward. One thing that's key to know about any of FileMaker's values function, except for get value. This is really annoying, but it's just part of how FileMaker thinks. FileMaker works whenever you're dealing with, FileMaker refers to a list of data using 2 different terms. List is one of them. We'll see that's a function, and I believe it's in logical, but also values. FileMaker uses the term values in order to reference multiple values on individual lines. The trick is when you're dealing with multiple values, you have a choice. Do you want to have a list of values and then be able to append to those values without having to add the return, or do you want to not have the return there? FileMaker has chosen a system where if you say get the left values, if you have 5 values and you say get 5 values, if you say get 3 of those, what happens is by default, any of FileMaker's values functions, it actually adds on a little extra return at the end, which to me is sort of annoying. So you have to, in some cases, pull that return off. And that's with right values, middle values, etc. Left words, length, very handy for finding the length of something. Here also is another good tip. Some of FileMaker's functions, you may think, until you read the description or the documentation, you may think, okay, length only returns the length of a string of text. Not true. The length function, when you use it against a container field, if that container field has a stored picture or a video or a Word document or Excel document, length actually returns the number of bytes in terms of the size of that file. So some of these things are hidden in FileMaker's functions, and you really don't find them until you're either exposed to them over your development career, or you watch a video like this, or you go into the documentation. Of course, I'm not going to be able to get through all these functions, so you're going to have to take the time to do that. Middle values, middle. They're all the same as left. They're just the middle. num2j, again, that's Japanese. Pattern count, a very valuable function when it looks like you want to count how many occurrences there are of something within text. Position, what is the position of a piece of text within text? Proper, that's something that converts it. We saw that in a previous video. It capitalizes the first letter. quote is something that we're going to actually need to spend a little bit of time on, a dedicated video where we talk about escaping and protecting things within a FileMaker calculation, and it deals specifically with text strings, and we'll look at the quote function probably dedicated. Replace, that is something that it's the little brother of substitute, where substitute you can find exactly what you want, but replace you have to know exactly where you want to start and stop. Write values and so forth. Roman, serial increment, that's something that deals with FileMaker serial numbers. Sort values, that's brand new to FileMaker 16. You won't see this in older versions. Substitute, one of my favorites. Trim all, uniques. Again, you can read these. Trim is pretty obvious in terms of what it does. Trim all just does more in terms of what it takes off of a field. If you have a user that's inputting some text, they're inputting a name into a name field, and we already took a look at FileMaker's field options in the previous video to this one. If you want to make sure that the users don't accidentally add spaces and all of those other extra characters, you're probably going to enjoy the trim function. If there's other things that you want to remove, trim all, take a look at the documentation. Unique values, that's also new to FileMaker 16, upper, value count, word count. All of these things in combination help you create the solution that you're looking for when you're learning all of your functions and modify your code. So that's just that was just a brief little spin through those. And if you'd like, you can leave down in the comments, hey Matt, that's actually pretty cool, that was helpful. I learned a little tip or trick about some of the functions I didn't know about. Take some time and go through the different sections. If I do, of course, that's going to be probably a unique video on each of the segments. But again, it really comes down to your solution. For example, financial functions, I can't say that I've never used FV, NPV, payment, and PV because I haven't worked on solutions specific to financial. So I really can gloss over those and didn't need to spend a whole lot of time. Design functions. We might want to go over a whole video based about the design functions, what you can do. They have a lot of impact to your FileMaker development and the environment. But I've gone way over, folks. I'm at 36 minutes, and I like to get to the questions for those of you that are watching this live. If you're watching this after the live broadcast, please put the comments down below, ask them. I get notified via YouTube, and we'll be able to take a look at those. So let's switch to our chat, see if we've got any questions that came in here. All right, minor question from HBH Group. Minor question, I noticed you didn't make a space in your text explicit by adding a space and concatenating that with words. Instead, you just hit the space bar in ate all food. Good observation on that. And I'll get to the next question. Let's take a look at that. So when it comes to your FileMaker calculation, it really doesn't matter how, sometimes it matters how you solve the problem, but it's really up to you in terms of the readability of your calculation. Now in the FileMaker's calculation engine, by adding the space here before the actual next word, all I did was avoid doing this scenario right here. Now this really comes down to what is more readable to you as a developer. If instantly you can see and identify that this is a space character, and that's easier for you to process when you're going back and looking at your code, that's a choice that you have to make. But there's so many ways that you can solve things in FileMaker that if you like to have really trim code, meaning code that's going to be shorter, then I wouldn't want to necessarily add that additional concatenation plus the extra space. I just add the space right in here. But maybe the space becomes a little bit more obscure and I don't necessarily know that it's there. I can see that my result is giving me what I want, but let's watch this. When I'm using the let function, if I had a really complex string and it really didn't, I would have the tendency to lose things within my code, then you can even do things like this. You can dedicate a variable such as space, and space is equal to what? It's equal to a space. So what I did in this case is using the let function, I actually said I'm going to have a space character in this. So in that regard, I could take off the space and I could go, I want to concatenate to the space character, and I want to concatenate that, and I'm still going to get the exact same result that I want. Now, where does this type of approach actually come into play? Well, if I had a really long string where, let's say, for example, I was doing concatenation to, and we'll pretend that this is a field, but some table field data. And that's what I actually had. And then that was concatenated to something else. In all of FileMaker, if you go back to, I recorded a video about dry coding. And dry coding means don't repeat yourself. So in this short little example that I'm going to give you here, and I'm going to put something else, and I'm going to concatenate in here space again, and we'll do it here too. So the example that I'm giving you here is very easily, I could have gone in and put a space right here, and I could have gone in and put a space right here, and I could have gone in and put a space right here. But that limits my flexibility in the context of this calculation. Now, the example that I'm giving you here is that if I was returning a lot of text and I wanted the particular character to be variable, now in this case, I'm being very literal. I'm saying, here's the name of something that I want to store. It is a space, and I'm giving it an actual space. But if in my code, I was actually saying this was a character, and I come back and I replace this character and this one, and we take off all of these characters, hopefully you're going to see the power that I've just given myself. And let's make this easier to read. I love to make code much easier to read. I like to start each of my new lines with a concatenation character. So by doing that, I can see what's actually happening in the calculation. It's much easier to read. Okay, I've got text, which is substitution, concatenated to character, concatenated to literal string, to character, to character, to character. Here is the takeaway. As I click right here, we can see that we're getting a space in all of our code over here. But it is so easy now for me to just change this. What if I wanted that character to be a dash? I just got a big brown dog dash, ate all the food dash some table data. Down the road, let's say the code changes again. Nope, we want a slash. It's much easier to take that approach. I gave myself flexibility rather than having put in the literal. So there's 3 different situations where you can put the code in a longer format to make it readable. You can put the code in a shorter format so that it just gives you the result that you want, maybe less readable, or you can make it in a super readable format with a super flexible capability of being able to change things out the way that you want. So again, in FileMaker, there's no one way to solve a problem. It's just a matter of over your time becoming familiar with when things are a little bit better this way versus that way. Here, there really isn't that much of a performance hit no matter which you choose out of all of these. Now, across 20,000 records, the let function would probably be a little bit slower than just directly turning the exact text. But you're not talking about a whole lot. All right, so let's see if we got one more question before we wrap up our video here. All right, are there functions to avoid? I have never, again, good question, but I've never come across a situation where I'm not going to avoid a specific calculation, but there's a good DevCon video that you should watch. I forget Chris. I forget his last name, but he talks about the logic engine of FileMaker. And if you want to learn about how FileMaker's engine processes in order and how you want to short circuit something so that the calculation actually evaluates faster than if it had to evaluate the whole calculation, that's what you're going to learn. Likewise, there are, as I create new functions, there are quicker ways to evaluate certain things. Here's a good case in point. If I have a string of text that says, this is the best text in the world. So let me zoom in on this really quickly. It's a good little lesson. You guys are here to learn. You like this stuff. So FileMaker has its pattern count. And this is what's fun about using FileMaker. When you get familiar with its calculation engine, you can just type them in. So pattern count, it probably wants string. Maybe I just gave myself too much of an issue here. Data, I do have to do this sometimes. I do have to go in and borrow the function. Pattern count, there we go. Copy that and cancel and get out of the data viewer. So we'll put that right there, pattern count. And here's a way, this is how you actually do, this is how I do FileMaker calculations. I basically write the functions at the bottom and then copy them and put them into. So you can see that I wrote my string first, or maybe I typed in my field first, then I cut that, and then I put it into my function, and then I actually, you know, build out from there when I'm doing multiple embedded. So here we go. So here's a good example of what's faster in terms of the question of, you know, what functions do you avoid? And this is only going to come later on as you're developing with FileMaker. Pattern count, it turns out, has to evaluate this whole string of text in order to actually find out whether the word this is in, or at least this is my understanding. If we contrast this to position of a string, the position function actually turns out to be a little bit faster. So these things you really don't find out until you've picked it up on a tip from a forum, or you've watched a video like this, or they slowly come in. So my suggestion is don't worry about making the mistake. You can always go in and change the code. Now you can't change massive structure. Sometimes you have to refactor those things, but you know, learning this type of thing, that's something that comes over time. Do I use position versus pattern count? And let's get the position function in there. There we go. Yeah, it can't be found. So this one actually is going to be a little bit faster using the position function, which is right there. And we would have start string, text, search string, and we would put it like this. This, 1, 1. From what I've heard, if you're doing a lot of text checking, this one actually is faster. And if I'm wrong, please put it down in the comments if you've spent the time. And you can performance benchmark these, but again, that takes time, and that's a completely different video. All right, and if we've got one final question, we'll take a look at that and any other comments. Because now the questions are going to come in. Fly by night. Do you use any text expansion tools to give you the formatting you prefer? Yes, I do. Fly by night. I actually, let's take a look at it really quickly. When you are formatting your code, you will inevitably come to the point where you want to be able to put code in FileMaker really quickly. And for example, I will type in fmlet, and it will give me my expansion, fmcase, and it gives me my expansion of the format that I like, fmif, and it gives me the format that I like. This is as opposed to FileMaker's method of doing that. And I'll show you the tool that I use. If it comes up here, there we go. Let's make sure. I got to get it off screen really quickly, just in case it didn't come up with my FileMaker code. All right, so here we go. Here's a little tip. I use this particular tool called Inator. Now, there's a bunch of tools that are out there. This is a Mac-only tool. For those of you that are on Windows, you're going to have to do a little bit of searching, but you can see that I've got all of these little shortcuts that I use, fmbench, fmbutton, fmcase. Some of them work within the context of calculations. Some of them worked within the context of scripting. But say, for example, filtering. The FileMaker filter function, when you're using it, if you have a string of code and you're going to use the filter function, there's many times where you just want a string of characters. So if I type in alphanum, I get the whole string of all of the upper and lower case and just number alphabet. That is so much easier to type alphanum than A, B, C, D, E, but etc. So I think you get the idea on that in terms of being able to speed up your development. And of course, you can put as many of those if you want. If you do want these, I do have them available freely, my whole collection. Again, a good segue on this particular question is go to the magazine website, FileMaker Magazine, and resources is what we're looking for. Let's make sure that, yeah, we're on resources right there. When you click on resources, you are going to be able to access, as we scroll down here, Podcast tools. There we go, right there. There is Matt's Typinator snippets. Every once in a while, I update these as I add to them, but if you want to download that for Typinator and you're on the Macintosh and you just want to take a look at some of the things that I have in there, there's even some really advanced stuff that deals with FileMaker's CSS attributes if you're going to hack FileMaker's CSS. Another video, another time. All right, so this is a long video. We've gone 50 minutes in. I think we're going to be doing our wrap right here. There we go. Thank you, Fly By Night. Algebra is awesome. DevCon, great session. If you're a new FileMaker learner, a little hard to get into, but absolutely wonderful. All right. And instant text, there we go. HBH Group just pointed out for those of you on Windows, instant text on Windows is a text expander. And I believe the text snippets, if you actually look at that with a text editor, you might be able to get my code out of it, even if you're not working on a Macintosh, if you're on Windows. They may have it in a format, I don't know exactly. But suffice it to say, I hope this video has helped you out as a new FileMaker learner in terms of playing with the functions. I wish I could just do a brain dump and give you all of the functions that I know about, but unfortunately, it's just not possible. It only comes with time. I'm going to wish you much luck with learning FileMaker functions as you go. I'll do the best I can with these series of videos. You're going to be able to subscribe to the YouTube videos here, and the next one that'll be in the series will be coming up right here. And always feel free to check out my videos on FileMaker Magazine. Until next time, see you later.